Hey, what's going on, everybody? Andrew here, back for our build review show. It is Tuesday, August 13th of 2024. Should be a good one here. We have 4 people on. Wants to get their build reviewed on a future show, drop your DK username in the office hours channel in our Discord server, and I can add you to the list for tomorrow. We do this show Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern following our office hours show. So excited for today. So let's get the builds up here. And we are already logged in as our first person today. So that is going to be Maverick from the Discord here. So going to jump into yesterday's slate here, seeing what they're playing. So this looks good, right? They're playing a mix here, playing some classic slates, playing some showdowns. I don't know if they ended up playing the turbos here, but nice to see that, you know, they are accessing more than one slate and spreading their bankroll across all of these slates appropriately. So that's always a good sign. All right, let's jump in here and let's start. The contest selection that we're seeing here looks pretty solid, pretty happy with the split that we're seeing here. So that looks really good, right? Seeing a good mix of dime times, like getting a lot of entries in here, even though, you know, not playing that much actual dollars, but spreading it out and getting a lot of entries in. So this looks like a solid split. All right, let's jump in here and let's look at the quarter jukebox and see how they graded out. All right, so this is Mr. Brad here. So Brad played 20 lineups. Let's set a filter for 20 lineups. And then let's sort by sim ROI, and let's see what we can find here. Our salary looks okay comparing to some of these top players here. Sim ROI, negative 12%. Let's see if we can help Brad to have a higher sim ROI here. Playing unique lineups, that looks good. This is probably like the biggest and most obvious thing I'm seeing right now, right? Sim average score about 100.7 or 100.75, not about. And some of the top sets, right? 111, 109, 110, 110, 112, 112. So for whatever reason, playing very, very low sim average score lineups, I think this is going to be the first and most obvious thing that we could probably change to help him get to better sim ROI portfolio. But let's just jump in here and let's see kind of where he landed, right? So correlation in his lineups looks good, playing at least a 4 stack in every lineup. This part's kind of interesting, right? I mean, Yankees highest team total, Arizona highest team total, Texas really good as well. So it's like, it's kind of weird to me how low projected his set is, considering he's playing, you know, so many of the top stacks here. But let's go further. Checking out his exposures. Matched the field on Snell, Sale, little low on Gill, very low on Fat. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. That's my best guess. Gosh, I'm not seeing anything here that is like, wow, that's bad, which is so strange. I thought we were going to come in here and be like, oh, he faded Snell, or like, oh, he full faded Chris Sale, or like something like that. So we got to figure out where those 10 points of projection are coming from, which we'll dive in deeper here and we will figure that out. All right. So split his build up into 3 builds here: large field GPP, small field GPP, 1-3 max, right? So I think that's okay, because if you come in here and you look at his contest mix, right? Basically, he's saying, hey, I'm going to do one build for like these 10,000 plus multi-entry GPPs. And then I'm going to do something maybe different for like these ones that are like less than 500, right? I think that's okay. You know, it's a fine split. So let's jump into this large field because we were looking at the quarter jukebox. Let's see what we can learn here. Okay, let's start with filters. Ownership less than 189. I think that's fine. Projected score greater than 95. So following some of our recommendations here already, right? This looks good. It reminds you he is on the standard plan, so using Saber score as his primary sorting metric. This looks good. Has a aggregate metric for projection here. Again, looks good. So not seeing anything that I would say like bad so far. Okay, no min or max exposures on the all tab. No min maxes on the batters. Okay, we're seeing some min maxes here on the pitchers. Primarily the biggest one being Chris Sale boosting Pablo Lopez. I wonder if he had any rules. Settings look good. No additional rules. Team sacks. Being a little opinionated with some teams here. Just two. I don't think that's terrible at all. Okay, a big boost to Texas 5 stacks. Okay. So I'm not sure the exact order of operations here. But what I would recommend is watching how this average projection changes as you make these adjustments. So for instance, let's say we reset this max exposure to Chris Sale and this minimum exposure to Pablo Lopez. Then we hit apply. So it's kind of just understanding like, hey, what impact did our changes have, right? So let's see. So we had the, I'm just going to write these down. Sale, 26% max. Lopez, 23% min. ARI, all, 21%. KC, all, 11%. And then Texas, 5 stacks, 25%. These are like the only changes that I saw. So let's say we reset all of these. I think that's all of them. Two, three, four, five. All look fine. Okay. All right. So everything's reset here, right? So what I was kind of getting at is like, hey, let's say that you see your average projection at like 105, and then you start making these changes and you see your average projection go from like 105 to 101. You need to be very, very confident that what you're doing is right and you are correct in sacrificing this projection for what you're doing. It doesn't seem like what you were doing had that impact because you were at like 101. And then right now, the average projection is still 100.96, right? So I don't think that's it. Man, did you like have a player with like exposure that like got ruled out or something? I don't know where those 10 points are like really coming from. Let's go back to your set. Everything you're doing in your build looks good to me. That's what's confusing me. Everyone has a check mark. Okay, it looks like you had 2 lineups with George Springer that didn't get swapped out. So let's just go and see what the lineups look like. And then let's sort them by SimROI. So it says Raph said Springer was a late rule out. Yeah, but it's only 2 lineups. Okay. So those two Springer lineups did have like a big impact here, right? We're seeing negative 60% lineup, negative 53% lineup. You know, that's just like driving your sim ROI lower than it probably wouldn't be. I mean, you know, I think that there's probably still room for improvement, right? Just because, like, yeah, you know, these are low, but even with, you know, Springer being out, like the average projection of the set was like 101. So this one's like 99 with Springer out. This other one's like 97 with Springer out. And they are very low sim ROI. But I don't think that, you know, removing these 2 lineups takes you from negative 12% to like positive 12%. Maybe takes you closer to like neutral or something like that. And then I think there's still probably enough lineups here that are negative sim ROI that are worth, you know, still kind of correcting for or like adjusting for, right? So let's come in here. Let's dive a little deeper. So it's a Texas 5 stack, negative 38%. This one probably comes from the projection adjustment, but then see, like this other one doesn't, right? Okay, 49.4. So typically I like this, right? I like when you take a chalky stack like Arizona, at least like from what I've seen, right? And you stack it in a way that's probably unique, right? Where it's like 1, 2, 6, 7, 9, or not 7, yeah, 6, 7, 9 stack. Like generally this ends up being better for the sim ROIs because you're getting to some of these lower owned pieces like the 11% Suarez, like the 13% Perdomo. Like I'm actually surprised to see that here. I think, man, I don't know. Some of these are so strange. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 1, 7, 8. These are very well projected Yankees. This lineup has a ton of ownership. Okay, let's just look. Let's zoom out a little bit. I think we're getting too much in the nitty gritty here. Okay, 100, 98, 99, 103, 102. What do some of his good lineups look like? $97, 107, 101, 99, 105. So this one's like really stumping me because he has lineups that look similar, that grade out very, very differently. So his projected score being like 101, some of the other sets being like 110, 109, 107, you know, made the biggest difference. I didn't really see anything he did wrong in his build. His build looks solid, aside for like some of the adjustments he made. But you come into his build, I mean, you come into his individual lineups, and it's like, well, I can't say that like the Texas 5 stack was bad because, I see some like good Texas 5-stack lineups, right? But then I also see like some bad Texas 5-stack lineups. And it's like, where kind of is the line for those, right? Like we see this negative 38% Texas sim ROI. Interesting. I'll tell you one thing that I am noticing in these lineups. Wow, that's so weird. Okay, 17. So the biggest thing I'm noticing is that it doesn't seem like the builder likes some of these very low projected pitchers. This is one of the biggest things I'm seeing here. So this Musgrove lineup here, pretty high salary. This is something I'm noticing. Musgrove, right? Kind of the same thing for Daniel. 7,200, 11 projection. Kershaw, not great. 7,700, 13 projection. Musgrove again. Lopez is like kind of low projected for his salary. 9,200 salary, 15 projection. If you compare Lopez to Gill, right? Like you can get almost 4.5 points of projection just by playing Gill over Lopez. I know it didn't work out, right? But we're not talking about how things actually worked out here. I think the biggest problem is probably coming from some of these pitcher selections, right? Blaylock, 9 projection. Maul, 6,800, 11 projection. We see Blaylock again. We see Francis, 5,800, 10 point projection, almost 11, right? Blaylock. I think what's happening here is that, there are just some pitchers here who are so well projected, and not playing them is actually really, really hurting you. Because when you pull up any pitcher, right, you're going to see that their distribution is very, very bell-shaped curvy, where, their most likely outcome is probably their mean, right? Very, very close to it. And you're going to see this nice distribution. The pitchers, more than anything, are the ones that you don't want to fade when they have ownership. And, you kind of want to be a little bit more willing to take that pitcher chalk. I think that you made a few decisions that got you away from that. And I think that that's probably the biggest issue here. Because if we just come in here and sort by projection, like Blake Snell, 9,300, 22 points. You set this minimum exposure to Pablo Lopez, who's 9,200, 15 projected points, right? Like you can get 6.5 to 7 point projection for 100 salary more by playing Snell instead of Lopez. And, you can get 5 more point projection by playing Snell instead of Freddie Peralta at the same exact salary. I think this was the biggest culprit to some of the sim ROIs we're seeing, such as the max exposure to Sale and then the minimum exposure to Lopez just didn't allow you to get to some of the better projected players like Gill, like Snell. Even Fat has a higher projection, lower salary, you even get some salary savings to use elsewhere. I think that is probably the biggest thing here that you could probably change to increase your overall average projected score, and therefore you're increasing your sim ROI. So the George Springer stuff, super unfortunate. I guess my biggest takeaway here is that 1, really good contest selection. 2, doing a lot of the right things in your build. 3, I don't know why exactly you made those few max exposures and minimum exposures, but I would really reconsider those based on our findings here. So that would be the biggest thing, in my opinion, that I'm taking away from this is some of those decisions you made at the pitcher spot specifically. So let me know if you have any questions, but we definitely had to dig a little bit deeper there. And it really comes down to the fact that you're not doing a lot wrong. So that's good, right? Small changes here can make a big difference. All right. Good stuff there. That was a pretty hard one, to be honest, right? So let's jump into today. Our next person up here is Mr. CL86. And let's get him up on the screen. All right. And let's jump back to yesterday. All right. Played the main slate yesterday. Let's jump in here. All right, good. We're seeing a bunch of swaps. One pre-build build. Let's jump into the contest tab first. Contest selection mix looks solid here, right? Seeing a big mix of single entries, 3 maxes, dime times, quarter, solo shot. This looks great. Loving this, right? Let's jump into the solo shot and see how he did. Even this, right? He mixes in 1 entry into the $5. He's like, you know what? I'm going to be building this big set of lineups. I want 1 shot at the $5. I think that's okay, right? Totally cool. All right. Players, users. Let me see really quickly. Okay. Great. Here we go. 20 entries. Sim ROI 1.5%, pretty close to neutrals. Let me write some of these down. 49 2K salary, 1.5% sim ROI, 102 sim average score. All right. Let's get rid of this filter. 20 entries, sim ROI. So the highest sim ROI in this contest is about 20-ish%, right? So seeing a little bit more salary being used, which kind of makes sense, right? Like salary is going to be correlated to sim average score. Again, we're seeing sim average scores like 107, 109, 110, and he had 102, right? So let's see if there's any decisions he made that could help him increase his sim ROI here. And let's go back to his set of lineups. Filter icon. So 19 out of 20 lineups have at least a 4 stack. Not seeing anything wrong there. Team exposures, pretty flat. I think this is okay. Basically full faded the Yankees. Interesting. All right. Let's come in and look at exposures. So top 3 exposures, all pitchers, 45%, 45%, 45%. Sale, Snell, Gill. About as expected. Went down and got some Freddie Peralta. But again, it's like pretty flat. Batter exposures, 1 batter, 35%, and then super flat again. What is like the actual ownerships? full faded Aaron Judge, full faded DJ LeMahieu. So really just like took like a big stand against a lot of these Yankees batters. So let's see what he did in his actual build that led to that decision. All right. So waiting for this build to load. A lot of lineups in the trash. A lot of lineups. Let's change sorting metrics. And then change back. All right, so let's start with filters. Okay. So it looks like you made a mistake here, which this is okay, right? This happens. So this filter says show lineups with projected score less than 110. This filter, you want this to be greater than. This should always be greater than. So we want to play high projected lineups. The only time you would use less than if you're using an ownership rule where maybe you want to chop off the highest owned lineups. Like, you know what? I'm trying to get rid of like the top 10% of lineups with the absolute most ownership, right? But for projection, we want to play high projected lineups. So this one, and you know, there's like different ways to write this, right? You could say hide lineups with projected score less than 110, but this was on show. So show lineups with projected score greater than whatever number, right? So when this says show for projected score, you want to use greater than. When this says hide, you want to use projected score less than. So that would be like the biggest thing I see right away. Comment says, I think what I was trying to do was from the optimal lower my projection in an effort to be different. Okay, so very good comment, right? And I like this question, right? You don't have to be that different. And I think that, you know, that's something, I think like the Sims kind of show you that, right? And even if we just like look at this top lineup on this, you know, for a 3 max, right? A 3 max, you're not going to need to get too different to win it, right? Like the builder is saying that, hey, this is the best lineup, right? Well, if you go in and look at it, it has 2 pitchers over 35% owned. It has one of the chalky teams as a 5 stack, but then it just gets different enough. You just need to be different enough. And then this build, it's saying, hey, you know, if you play Charlie Blackmon, Jake Cronenworth, and Rhys Hoskins, you know, you get different enough from these 3 one-offs where you can play the chalk pitchers and the chalky stack and still have a good positive sim ROI. So I understand like wanting to get different, but I don't think that you need to get that different, right? I think the only time where you really need to think about like, hey, I want to get really different is in like showdowns or like sports with an optimal where you're trying to avoid duplication. Like if you're not trying to avoid duplication, I think that, you know, the builder is going to help you get different enough and you don't need to take extra steps to kind of do so, or else you might end up hurting your lineup set a little bit. So I would recommend staying away from that filter, just like going forward based off what we're seeing in contest flashback, right? Hey, we're at, you know, 1.5% positive sim ROI. That's good. How do we get to 10%? How do we get to 20%? Seems like that projection is one of the biggest things to do it. And, you know, some of these decisions might help with that, right? We actually do want to play higher projected lineups that get different enough. So I think that's a big takeaway, something that I've been seeing like kind of more and more here. All right, let's jump into some of these decisions. So really, really opinionated. It almost seems like you have a minimax exposure for every player. So what I would imagine is you are either uploading these or you're using match exposure to ownership feature, where you're coming into the My Own Gear column, and then you're clicking on, match exposure to ownership, and then you're using something like this, right? This could also be driving your ownership, your projected score down as well, because you are basically guaranteeing that you get to every player on a slate. And, the builder is saying like, hey, sometimes it doesn't want to, right? Sometimes it doesn't want to play everybody, right? It wants to zone in on some of the plays that it perceives to be better. I think people sometimes do this when they get, okay. So he said, match exposure to ownership. I did that to get the optimal and then ran the sims. So I think it's okay to do something like this if you're just building lineups, right? I've kind of talked about this idea where people will say like, hey, my exposure is a little too concentrated in my pool. What can I do? Well, in that case, what I would recommend is come into here, set a global max exposure, say to like 30%. And then, you're not, that way, across your 5,000 lineups, you're not going to get any player in more than 30%, which is 1,500 lineups. And then after the build is run, you come in and you reset these max exposures. So from all the lineups available, the builder can decide, hey, maybe this guy deserves to be in more than like 30% or something like that. And you kind of take it that approach where you're doing a diverse pool, but then you're letting exposures fall where they will beyond that as far as like the ranking grading system here. But I think what ends up happening is that you almost force in lower projected plays that the builder perceives to be not good, which can drive down your sim average score. So, I've seen people do this, like if they have FOMO where it's like, hey, I want to have like at least one stack of every team on the slate or something like that. I don't love that approach because just on any given night, they're just better. There's always going to be an angle that SaberSim wants to play, a team that SaberSim wants to play. Like, if we run a default build, we are not going to get to every team on the slate, and that's okay, right? This is daily fantasy sports. If you brick today, guess what? You load up a fresh slate tomorrow. Like, that's why bankroll management's important. That's why all these other slates are important too, right? You come in here, you can play the turbo, the night slate, right? You can play 3 games at this 340. You can play 2 separate games unrelated to those at 510. You can play 4 separate games from either of those at 638, right? Like, you can play 3 slates where all the games are uncorrelated and make decisions on each one. If you're wrong on one, guess what? That has no bearing on the other slate or the other slate, right? Like, that's why all these other classic slates are cool. But even if you mess up on the main slate, like, guess what? You load it up again tomorrow and you try again. So, don't let FOMO get in the way of, don't let fear of missing out really like drive home some of the decisions you make as far as like your exposures and stuff. It's okay to not play everybody on a slate. And you know what? If you miss it, it's okay. That happens, right? That's DFS, but I don't love all of the minimax exposures here. I would probably try without it and see how your sim ROIs end up falling and, figure out maybe a different way to achieve a similar goal. So that would be something I'm looking at. All right. Few opinions here with team stacks, lowering some of the lowest team totals here with a max exposure. I think that's okay, right? He basically like match pool for the White Sox, which I think is actually a good benchmark to follow, right? Following this pool exposure, matching that. And then one lineup in our 592 remaining for Colorado. He's like, yeah, I probably going to not let any more than that, like very, very low here. So I think some of these adjustments to team exposures are good. I would really recommend doing the min uniques first and then fine tune adjustments to exposure. So what this would look like is coming in here. And more than anything, let's say I'm doing more than 3 lineups, right? Let's say I'm doing all 93 that he has. And it's like, hey, I'm going to increase min uniques, right? I'm going to see, you can see the effect that this has just on your player pool, right? Like the minimax exposure gets you access to more players in the player pool, right? So at mini unique of 1, we're at 109 players. Well, what if we get to mini uniques of 5? And let's turn off this projection filter. That gets us more lineups, right? Mini unique of 5 gets us to 118. Let's see how far down we are. Mini unique of 7, we run out of lineups. Let's try 6. No, we gotta go down to 5. Okay, so one other note here, right? So we have the ROI set to greater than 10%. I would try 0. That gives us more lineups here, right? 1604. It's okay to play like neutrally ROI lineups, right? These are an estimate. But then mini unique of 6 gets us to 123 players in our player pool, right? So our player pool is going up and up and up. Another thing that I think might be happening is because you're setting the min-max exposures before the build, those get taken into account in the lineup building process, right? It seems to me like 3,500 lineups is probably like a lot. I might be wrong. I might be right, but trashing 3,500 lineups is not totally out of the realm of possibilities. But I think that because the minimax exposures are going into the lineup building process, that you might be ending up with more negative ROI lineups than if you didn't have those up front. So, I would try running it without the minimax exposures. You might end up with more available lineups, which ends up allowing you to have more min uniques, which ends up allowing you to get to a bigger player pool, which is kind of the goal that you wanted to achieve in the first place, was having more players in your player pool, right? So there's different ways to kind of get to the outcome that you were trying to get to. But I would try and just try it today, right? And this is also something we talk about, is pick a contest and say, you know what, maybe I want to keep building the way I'm building for now for the solo shot, but maybe I'm going to take Andrew's advice. I'm going to do a separate build for the quarter jukebox where I try out his advice and see if it's right, and then see how the results come in for the quarter jukebox over the next, few days here. And then if I'm seeing higher sim ROIs in the quarter jukebox, well then, hey, maybe I expand that, and then maybe I do end up trying it in the solo shot, right? So like you could try different things out in one contest, see if they work, and then expand it to the rest of your portfolio accordingly. Like that's kind of that's almost me being skeptical of myself, right? That's me being skeptical of the advice that I'm giving you. So I would probably try that out and see if, not using match exposure to ownership ends up leading to different results in one contest versus a contest where you do use it. So that's my best advice there. Really quickly, Brad says, thanks for the review. I was confused as well why I had such poor results last night, but I chalked it up to variance. Thanks for the review. Yeah, man. Happy to help out. It was a good one. It was a tough one. All right. Let's move on to our next person, Evan here. And let me get him up on the screen. Carrington, happy to help, man. Happy to help. All right. So we are getting Evan up on the screen, and then we have Brady after him. All right, let's jump back to yesterday. And let's get this up on the screen. Okay. I pulled up yesterday, but not seeing any builds. Let's go back to Sunday. Okay. Am seeing contest for Sunday here. So this will be a good start. So let's jump into contests here. All right. So this is one of those times where we have to talk about contest selection. So there are a lot of good contests to play if you have access to them. Even if you don't have access to them, there are still other good contests to play that are where you can get a lot more entries down, right? Like even if we just take the 121 here, you have one entry in the 121, right? I mean, we could go and play so many other contests, even if you don't have access to contests that are lower dollar, right? Like you can go and play. Let's see what we got here. The $5 single entry, the $12 single entry, the $25 single entry, the $20 three maxes. So that's like the $27 single entry, right? Like there are a bunch of good contests that you could play, right? So if you think about this, 27 plus 60, that's 87 plus 592 plus 12, 104 plus 25, 129, right? So for almost the equivalent plus $8, we could have played 1, 2, 3, 6, 7 entries in similar style contests, right? So I even and I'm assuming that you don't even have access to low stakes contests, right? Which I don't even know is the right assumption or not. If you have access to low stakes contests, start like when you are in the lobby, sort from lowest to highest entry fee and fill those up. Fill up the daily dollar, the $1 three max, the $1 the $1 three max, $3 three max, like all those contests, fill them up. All right. I gotta recommend that for sure. And then similarly with a flagship, right? 15 entries, this is costing you $270, if my math's right. And like, if you have low stakes, fill them up. Dimes, quarters, $1.20, $3.20, right? Mini max, mega mini max, whatever they got going on, right? $4.20 max, four seamer, play it all. $8 multi-entry, right? Fill in some of these, like spread this money around and get more entries down. Getting more entries down is going to help you out so much. So interesting thing here, right, is like the bankroll split ends up being like pretty decent with like 121 versus like 270. Bankroll split is good, but we got to get you playing more entries. That's the biggest thing here. All right, let's go and look at your 15 lineups in the flagship. Users. Set a filter for 15. So remember, when you're doing this research, always look at persons who entered greater than or equal to the amount of entries you had. So you got to make that change. All right, sort by sim ROI. So highest sim ROIs here around like 10-ish%. Oh, black screen again. All right, I'm gonna reshare. All right, should be good here. So highest sim ROIs around 10% here, sitting at -7%. So there's some room for improvement here. Let's see what we can do, right? And this reminder, this is Sunday slate. This isn't Monday's, the one that we've been reviewing for the other few people here. All right, average salary in line. We talked about sim ROI, unique lineups. Sim average score doesn't look terrible, right? Top lineups. I mean, he's a couple point projected lower, but it's not as egregious as like some of the other ones we've seen where it's like minus 10 point projection difference or something like that. This is small. It's like 2 to 5 points, right? So this isn't bad at all. Okay. So let's look at these 15 lineups and let's look at what they look like. Okay, so this 2-2-2, this 3-2-2, this 3-3-2, even this 4-1-1-1-1 make me a little bit nervous because you only had 15 lineups and that's about a third of them, 4 out of 15 here. So not sure how these lineups snuck in here. We'll dig a little deeper. Okay, Big stands on Baltimore, who had like a middling run total compared to some of the other teams on the slate. Like middle of the pack-ish. And then Boston, who had a decent run total. And then pretty flat thereafter. Okay, exposures. Biggest exposures to pitchers, totally fine. After that, pretty flat at the batters, even though like we see the, pretty high team stacks, getting pretty spread out at individual batters. So this looks good. So let's jump into a build. We got to start with this MME. Stick with this. Now let's come in here and see some of the decisions that were made here. SS 1, 2, 3, 4. I wonder what his sims look like. Okay. Flagship. So SS1 looks good. Okay. Starting to understand. Okay. Okay, I get it now. So he has 4 contest sims here. He's basically taking all of the MME field lineups and running a contest sim against them all. I don't think that's bad. Now, I'm not sure why we are only seeing 15 lineups in the pool. The only thing that typically makes sense here is that he used optimizer mode to build his lineups. Or else I don't know why my lineups in pool would be matching here. If you did that, I would highly recommend switching back to sim mode and setting up your build settings like we're viewing now. What is this build one? One lineup. The single entry build. Let's see what this one is. So this one has 5,000, even though it's labeled single entry. So I'm not 100% what's going on here across the board. Throwing me for a loop a little bit. But what I would highly recommend is if you're using optimizer mode, which it looks like you were, switch back to sim mode, build the most lineups you can. And then if you're going to run all these different contest sims, which I think is fine, I don't have a problem with this approach at all. Put a filter here for every contest sim. So, hey, from the flagship MME, show lineups with ROI greater than 0. And then from the second one, which was the high stakes MME, show lineups with ROI greater than 0. And then do it. I think the next one was low stakes. And then the last one would be medium stakes, right? Set this filter for all of these. So what you're trying to do here is you're trying to capture ownership variance where, hey, maybe the ownership between these field lineups is slightly different. Well, the ownership's not a slam dunk to come in at the flagship. Maybe it comes in closer to the low stakes. Maybe it comes in closer to the high stakes. By accounting for these other contest sims, you're accounting for that ownership variance. And then you're doing it just on the MME field, right? Just on the field where these lineups that match this contest, right? So I think that's okay. But the whole point of like filtering and doing all this stuff is if there are lineups in your pool that are negative, you're going to get rid of those and push lineups to the top that are positive across all 4. So you got to have that big pool here in order for this to work effectively. So build out all 5,000 lineups no matter what. And then that will also allow you to diversify, right? You'll be able to use min uniques. Okay. So this looks like another case of somebody using match exposure to ownership. This is going to be harder and harder to do the smaller the number of lineups you need is. It's like almost impossible. So I would recommend not using this unless you're playing an outrageous amount of lineups. Even then, I don't even know if it's viable. I think you're better off using min uniques and some small fine-tune adjustments rather than using this feature. The only time I ever recommend using this feature is if you're building a custom set of field lineups based on custom ownership, which it looks like you have custom ownership, but this doesn't look like a custom set of field lineups. So that's what's kind of throwing me off here. So that's really what that tool is kind of meant for. All right. So biggest things wrapping this up: contest selection, using sim mode instead of optimizer mode, not using match exposure to ownership, and then setting those lineup filters for all the different contest sims that you have. You start doing that, I think that's going to take you a lot further than any other adjustments at the moment. So give that a shot. Circle back with me. Let me know how it's going. But good stuff. All right. Moving on to our last person here, which is going to be Brady. And let's get Brady up on the screen. And let's jump back to Monday. See if Brady played the main slate. And Brady did. Yep, 90 lineups on the main. All right, let's go to contests. So 50 lineups in the flagship, playing a lot of single entry and 3 max. So the single entry and 3 max splits look good, right? Starting low dollar, working your way up, right? I think this is good. But the only thing I would say is mix in some of these other contests first. The same way you're starting high to low with a single entry and 3 max, like do the same with your multi-entry, the dime times quarters, solo shot, moon shot, $4.20 max. And then, with whatever bankroll is left, because even if you do that, right? Moonshot 60, $4.20, 80. That's 140. Solo shot 160, 165 at the quarter. Play a couple dime times like 169. Even if you're tapped out here, right, at 250, that still leaves you like $70 or even $80 to put into that contest. So maybe you only end up with 15 or 16 entries in the flagship, but you just gained, a bunch more entries across all these other good contests still. You gain 20, 40, 60, 80. You gain like another 100 lineups from adding that mix, right? So then you end up with 115 entries instead of just 50, right? It's all about getting more lineups in. So that'd be my biggest recommendation there. Let's see how you grade it out here in the $5. All right, jumping over to users. And we're going to have to search here. Okay, so this is Mr. Brady. So let's write down some stuff here. So 50 entries. 49.4K salary. 7.7% positive sim ROI. It's good. Sim average score 101.3. All right. So let's take this username filter off. So far, positive signs here. So we want to see people that entered greater than or equal to 50. So he is positive 7.5%. Some of the highest here are like high teens, pushing 20s here, right? So how can we take him to the next level is the biggest thing that we're trying to figure out here. So semi score is like a 101. We're seeing some of these like 106, 105, 104. There's a little room for improvement there. I think that might help him out. I don't think that's going to get him all the way to the top here. So let's dig a little bit deeper and see some of the decisions that he made. Keying in on his set of lineups. So at least a 3-stack in all these lineups. Only 2-3 lineups with only a 3-stack. That's not terrible. Dodgers, Arizona, Toronto, Yankees. Okay. And this is for Monday's slate. Sort by exposure. Pitcher. And then gets into the Dodgers, which he took a big stand on. All right. Let's jump into a build. What do we got here? Flagship, MME, RAROI greater than 20%. Projected score greater than 92. Okay, projection score filter looks good. I really recommend with the contest sim filters to always use ROI. And the biggest reason here is that, you're going to see like, hey, like this lineup, for example, 39% sim ROI, risk adjusted ROI, 63%, right? These numbers are different. And the sim ROI is literally taking how much money the lineup won in the contest sim and then dividing it by the total entry fees across the 100K sample, right? So it's the $15 or the $5. It's going to be, how much money the lineup won divided by $500,000. And, obviously the lineup won more than that because this sim ROI is positive, right? The risk adjusted ROI is describing something a little bit differently as to how the lineup performed based on like the lineup's payout distribution. So stick with sim ROI for these filters would be my first recommendation. And then also, you're going to end up with less lineups in the trash, right? Like you're trashing almost all your lineups here. If we change this to ROI greater than 0, we end up with less lineups in the trash. And we'll still figure out why there's so many, but it does end up being less. And I wonder if it's this projection. Nah, even the projection, small change there. All right. So we see some capping with minimax exposures. Not a ton, at least here on the all tab. I don't know why there's like one random DJ LeMahieu one. But it looks like he handled it mostly there. Average projection is really high here, so that looks good. No team stacks. I wonder if there's anything in the individual positions. 1B. $3B. No, I'm not seeing anything here. I'm not 100% sure why. I'm not 100% sure why he ended up with so many lineups in the trash just with this one filter. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where like maybe he had those, projection adjustments. I'm sorry, those minimax exposures pre-built, and it just led to playing pitchers or something that the builder didn't really want to play. It would have rather played a lot more of these guys, but it didn't. I'm not 100% sure why we end up with so many lineups in the trash, but either way, changing from risk adjusted ROI to ROI got us from like 118 lineups in our pool up to 470, which helps. We see a very strong projected score now. So some of these adjustments I think will help a lot. So to reiterate, to wrap up here, the same way you're working these single entry and 3 maxes, lowest to highest, work them for the multi-entry as well. Switch the filter from RA/ROI to using just ROI. And maybe one other thing you could possibly do is reset the minimum salary. I think you lowered it here to 47,000. You know, projection is going to be correlated to salary. So setting your minimum salary 48,000, which is like the default, even 48.5 could help a little bit. 49,000 if you want to get aggressive with it. That could help as well here, right? So those are some things here that I would recommend adjusting and trying and see if that helps you. You are already positive 7% sim ROI. That's great. Let's see if we can get you to be one of the highest sim ROI players in the contest. But all right, great stuff there. Was a lot to go over today. Felt very different from some of the other reviews that we've done here. There were a couple questions in the YouTube chat. I want to knock those out real quick. Rob said, any suggestions for hand building? No, man. Sign up for SaberSim. We have a 5-day, no strings attached free trial. See what we're about. And, you know, come on these shows. You know, we have the office hours at 4 p.m. Eastern. We have this show at 5 p.m. Eastern, and ask some questions and get some help. Mathis said, can you show your process how to build 20 max unless there's a video already? Yeah, I do build reviews. I do a build demo every day on the office hours show. This show is a little more specific to reviewing users' builds. It takes up a lot of time, so we try not to deviate from the content. But you can see me build lineups every day at 4 p.m. Eastern. You can also check out the recordings of those shows on our YouTube channel. And then we have MLB-specific playlists, every sport specific content on our YouTube channel. You can see a coach build lineups. Austin said, what's your favorite sort by setting and filters? It's always going to be risk-adjusted ROI if you're using the contest sims. It's going to be Saber Score if you do not have access to contest sims. And then as far as filters, ROI greater than 0, and then trimming the lowest projected score lineups out of your pool with a projection filter has been something that I've really keyed in on based on these reviews here. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Nice, good show today. If anybody else wants their builds reviewed tomorrow for tonight or even yesterday, drop your DK username in the office hours channel in Discord and I will add you to the queue. So until then, everybody, take care. Good luck. Thanks. Bye.